Well, as you'd have seen from those reports, we have a whole team of SABC reporters on the ground in Kenya covering that story. And one man who's right in the thick of it today and got caught up in some very disturbing scenes is Aldrin Sampear. Let's cross to him now live in Nairobi to catch up on the day's activities. Aldrin, what a day.
Indeed, what a day. It's one of those things that you don't want to experience, considering that such an important decision is being made by the 14 million Kenyans who have registered to vote. But of course, as we've been indicating since yesterday as well, and since earlier this week, when Raila Odinga has been calling on NASA supporters as well as his supporters not to go to those ballots. And as you've seen in those visuals that we just played in those packages, at least in the areas that I went to, people did not come out in their numbers as expected. If you compare the numbers of people who came out compared to what happened back on August the 8th, things do definitely look different. Even the level of violence and the level of destruction that's taking place, not the scenes that we saw on August the 8th. And that's certainly something that the Kenyan officials, the IEBC officials, will have to look into. An announcement was made earlier on that in some counties, at least 4 counties, where counties where voting couldn't take place, that there will be a second opportunity for voters in those areas to cast the ballot. That voting will be taking place on Saturday. Earlier on, the AU Observer Mission led by Thabo Mbeki said as well that it's quite early at this point to pronounce on whether these elections were free and fair. But Peter, one thing is certain, considering that some people have been violently barred from participating in these elections and casting their ballots, it would be very difficult, I guess, for these observers to say that these elections were free and fair, even for the IEBC for that matter. One thing that we need to look into is at the moment that the counting is currently underway, and this is something that most people will be watching quite closely, considering that the basis of the elections being nullified was on this very issue, the issue around irregularities that took place around the counting, as well as the Form 34As as well as the 34Bs. That will be very, very important. I see that the police here in Kenya have also issued a statement saying that they've heard disturbing news that there are those people who are trying to attack the vehicles that will be transporting these ballot papers to the various constituencies, where they will be counted again and then of course be beamed on the public portal that we expect the IEBC to make available to the public. And of course we'll be watching that very, very closely. But Peter, if you look into the violence that have been taking place, quite a nice story as well is the human interest stories, the stories about the human spirit, the elderly who have come out to come and cast their ballot. I saw visuals and pictures of people, for instance, one husband who was carried by his wife on her back to go and cast his ballot. One son as well, or grandson, who tried to carry his grandfather on his back to make sure that he cast his ballot. So quite important moment for some people who have go out and made sure that they want to cast the ballot. But then on the other side, of course, a number who have heeded the call by Raila Odinga not to cast their ballot. Let me just quickly bring in Sarah Kimani. You've also been following these elections. You've been with the president earlier on and with the IEBC. And they must be very concerned looking at the number of people who have turned out, Sarah.
Yes, the IEBC talking about issues of insecurity, violent disruption of elections, and the disruption that even caused in some areas returning officers, polling clerks not to open polling stations. And they said because of that, there will be repeat elections in some constituencies, in some counties. They also talked about not being quite clear at this point when they can tell us the exact person who will have won this election, or to give us the final results, because on Saturday, as you might have heard now, there will be repeat elections in some counties, but also because when the election results of August were nullified, one of the things that the Supreme Court said is that Wafula Chebukati, the chairman of the commission, did not wait for all the results to come to the National Tally Center before he announced President Uhuru Kenyatta as winner. So Chebukati, I'm sure, will be very careful this time not to announce very early who the winner is. Maybe just to look at the situation in the country now and what came before this. There had been talk and a lot of people calling on President Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga to sit on a dialogue table and talk out things because the country is deeply divided. Today we asked President Kenyatta if he is willing to dialogue with Odinga, and he said that it is time for the country to start healing, and he said he will be reaching out to Raila Odinga if Raila Odinga will agree to this, now that he has said that the National Super Alliance, his coalition, has now been turned into the National Resistance Movement. We do not know if indeed as a movement or as a resistance movement he will be willing to sit down with President Kenyatta, his political rival, for years to begin negotiations to heal a deeply divided country. Back to you, Peter, in studio.
Our reporters there, Sarah Kimani and Aldrin Sampear, covering today's action in the presidential rerun in Kenya, which sadly today ended fatally with 3 supporters of Raila Odinga being caught up in clashes with police and losing their lives. We'll keep on top of that story, and as you heard, Aldrin was really in the thick of it. But let's take a look and see what's been happening on social media today in Kenya. While some parts of the country were marred by violence, the Director of Elections, Jeanette Mohammed, was happy to post this picture of him and main opposition leader Raila Odinga, who pulled out of the rerun, happily sitting at home. But not all voting stations were plagued by violence. In fact, there were quite a number, quite the opposite. There were no queues and sunshine to stations that were simply in a sad state of affairs, especially when the rain came down. But with a long night of preparation and no action, officials simply couldn't stay awake. What a hard day's work. Well, one official stole all the spotlight at the voting station. Machakos Governor Dr. Alfred Mutua and his wife turned up to a place to vote to their vote. Finally, something for the journalists to capture. And as you can see, there were more journalists than actual voters. But there were still the heartwarming moments, like this man, as Aldrin was talking about, who carried his father to a voting station.